Good morning, Gail.
Hi, Mary Jean.
Thank you so much for doing this interview with the Veteran Feminists of America project. We're pleased and honored to have you as a part of it.
Wow.
Thanks.
Thrilled to do it.
Thanks. So tell me your name and where and when you were born, please.
I'm Gail Gabler, and I was born in Elgin, Illinois in 1959.
All right. And talk about your family background, how you were raised, ethnic background, whatever is appropriate.
So, white and middle class. When I finally read The Feminine Mystique in college, I thought, this is my mother's life. Because it was very much, she was a college-educated woman, married my dad. They had their first baby when he was in law school, and she loved her jobs before she had a baby, and then she didn't work again, and she was at home and raised 5 kids.
Right.
So that's my background.
So where are you in the birth order?
I'm the third. I'm the middle.
Okay. All right. Good. So 5 total. All right. And so describe what your life was like before you got in the women's movement, whatever period of time that is. Yeah.
So I got involved in the women's movement in college.
Okay.
So my life leading up to that was one of gradually becoming a little bit political. Not until really the 1976 elections, the Carter elections, I really remember those very distinctly.
Were your parents politically involved?
No, not at all.
Okay.
No.
So you
didn't talk a lot about politics.
Okay.
We all, my mother and sister watched the Watergate hearings.
Interesting.
And we all watched Nixon resign. So there are those kinds of political memories.
Right.
I was watching Bozo's Circus when John F. Kennedy was shot. Don't remember that at all.
Okay.
But not particularly political.
Okay.
But I wrote a paper during junior high, I guess, about the Women's Live movement, which is, remember when it was called that?
Yeah,
the
sure.
Women's Live movement. I reread it years later and, saw that it said, at the beginning of this, I wasn't sure how I felt about it, but now at the end, I have to say I support the Women's Live movement.
Interesting.
And part of it was going around and interviewing my mother and neighboring women about how they felt, and
Did you get an affirmative response from your mother?
She was a little bit more mixed.
Yes.
I think because
Right.
maybe she didn't want anybody in the family to know how she felt about it, but
Right. Good point. Yeah.
but she would sometimes at some point after that, she would sometimes talk about male chauvinist pigs. So that moniker definitely came out of her mouth more than once.
So where'd you go to college?
I went to Harvard.
Okay. And how did you happen to go there? Just got in, right?
Yeah, basically.
What did you study?
Government, political science.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you were already
I was
interested
very
in politics at that point.
I was interested in
So
politics.
this would have been, let's see, you were born in 59.
77 to 81.
Okay,
Yeah.
so that's pretty political time in American life, too. Yes.
Yeah, and actually on campus really it was like anti-apartheid movement.
Okay,
Yeah, so I participated in some marches on that.
okay,
There was also some issue around diversity of the student body, and so I got involved with the Democratic Club on that. Campaigned a little bit for Ted Kennedy when he was running against Jimmy Carter. So I was starting to get political about that.
So then when, what actually would you say constituted getting involved in the women's movement or in politics generally, and what did you do when you graduated from Harvard?
Right, so I was getting a little bit political, thought I would go to graduate school. So I remember I wish I knew this woman's name, but I'm going to choke up a little bit. So there was an interview on the radio, and it was in 81, so I was, going to be graduating a few months later.
Right.
Wasn't sure what I was going to do. I thought I would go to graduate school. Wasn't involved yet in any feminist organizing.
Right.
But the woman on the radio was talking about the threats to abortion rights of the new Reagan administration.
Oh.
And talking about how I wish these young women would understand that their lives are at risk here. And what was from her really a plea from someone who's clearly dedicated and really sounded a bit beleaguered and anxious. That plea for help was a real call to arms for me.
Excellent.
So I called Now, the Boston Now chapter, right after that, and started getting involved with them.
Wonderful.
And
Wouldn't she feel good if she knew that story?
Yeah, I do wish I knew who that was.
Yeah.
We'll pretend it's Rosemary.
Yeah,
you know?
well, it could be. Right,
It
right,
could have
right.
been. Could have been.
So what did you do in the Boston Now chapter at that
So
time?
I mean, I graduated a few months later, so it was mostly attending marches and maybe helping with leafleting and that sort of thing. So I didn't take on any huge role. I just
Right.
started volunteering. But to their credit, and really to the credit of the women's movement generally, when somebody new comes in who's got a little fire in their belly, they're like, come on in and get involved. So that was definitely the case.
And were you working at that point?
Well, I was
Just
in school,
graduating.
and I was
Just
writing
still in
my
school.
senior
Right.
thesis,
Okay.
and I was
Okay.
temping. I did and that's the other thing in terms of my background involvement is that my first jobs were as a secretary because I learned to type in 6th grade, so I never went the retail route or waitressing. It was always office work.
Me too.
So I had that in summers. I had that as my side job to help pay for some bills during college, and probably every typical woman's job, you feel the sexism,
Right.
but definitely as a secretary,
Right.
I felt it. And I felt it maybe even more so when I was a Harvard student, because somehow people would say, oh, and then I was up here. But like
Right.
if I was just, temping or something else like,
Right.
okay, do this, do that, go get my coffee and,
Right.
whatever. And people who would make these terrible spelling and grammatical mistakes that I had to correct and like,
Right.
but somehow they're up here. And,
Right.
but then if I was, I'm going to a good school, I was somehow above now these other women
Right.
who were doing the same work full time for their careers and doing it better than I could do it coming in on a
So
short-term
you were
basis.
conscious of that. You
I was
had a
very
consciousness
conscious of it, and
how
I
they
really
were treated.
bristled at it. It was very
Right.
unjust to me.
Right.
And,
Right.
I really resented it that,
Right.
so you didn't respect me yesterday. Now you respect me a little bit more.
Right.
I actually had an interesting experience with John Kenneth Galbraith, totally aside from the women's movement.
Right.
But
Right.
so I had never, when I was temping, I never wanted to be sent to temp at Harvard because it's like that's where I'm a student. I don't want to be a temp there because I had experienced this other thing
Right.
in my summer jobs, etc. But one time they're like, we really need somebody. He's finishing a book. He needs somebody to transcribe his, his ramblings and put it, into written form. And you're our fastest. You're really good at transcribing. Please, will you do this? And okay, so I went and I helped transcribe one of his books. And so he wasn't in the office all the time. He was coming and going, whatever. But he learned I was a graduating senior, and so I was invited to the graduation party at his house.
Wow.
Which usually has, the grad students. He didn't have too many undergraduates there, but I guess he thought it was appropriate. So I show up at his house. He's welcoming everybody as they come in. So he, shakes my hand, well, hi. And so what are you going to do when you graduate? I'm like, I'm going to New York. I was going to go to graduate school, but I'm still thinking. He's like, well, you'd be a great secretary. You're a really good secretary.
Oh my goodness.
And I just thought, here's this guy who's this, Democrat and,
Right.
liberal guy and a
Right.
professor and is at Harvard.
Right.
I just graduated Phi Beta Kappa from Harvard.
There you go.
And you're telling me I should be a secretary.
There you go.
And sure enough, I went to New York and signed up for different agencies, and they wanted to keep sending me for secretarial jobs. And that would never happen to a man. That would never happen to a man.
No.
But I got my first job in New York
Okay.
at a city agency, and I got it by networking, because that's what women do.
Right.
Folks in Boston Now recommended, well, they probably have a commission on the status of women. Good idea. Got an information interview with a person from the Commission on the Status of Women, and she got me connected, and I got a city job. And,
That's amazing.
Yeah.
That's an amazing story.
Yeah.
Good for you.
And I quit it like 4 months later to work full time for Now New York City.
Excellent. So your first paid job in the women's movement was working for was that a paid job?
It was a paid job.
Okay.
It was a paid job.
Who was the president at that time?
The president was Denise Fuge.
Okay.
Yes. And behind the scenes, always very active, Noreen Connell.
Right.
Yeah. So the two of them, sort of had the vision to, we need a full-time organizer working on, ERA and abortion rights, et cetera, but particularly on the ERA ratification.
So was that when you became aware of the ERA ratification?
I mean, I knew about it
You knew about
already.
it.
You
Okay.
know, I think
Right.
I don't remember when I learned it. I don't think my involvement in Boston now is when I first heard of it.
Okay.
It's when I first did anything about it.
Right.
And then coming to New York, it's,
Right.
it was,
Right.
it was clearly something that I should be involved in, and they wanted an organizer, and,
So talk about, this would have been 1982?
it was
Or
81.
81.
Later,
81.
end of 81.
Okay,
Yeah.
and the ERA countdown campaign was going on
Yes.
around the country.
Yeah.
So talk about the role that New York played,
Yeah.
and maybe other states too.
Yeah, so actually it was, although I was definitely not the mover and shaker of it, I was literally the full-time person on it. So that's where I really cut my teeth on it. We came back from the Now Convention in 1981 with sort of this mandate that we got to pass this, time's running out, we have until
Right.
June 30th of next year.
Right.
And it wasn't just a job for the unratified states, it was definitely the entire country, as you say. So now New York said, okay, we are going to mobilize to send people to Florida and Illinois. And we're going to raise some money to do it, and we're going to train people, and we're going to call it Equality Riders. And so we did. And we recruited people from the chapter. They had to put in a certain amount of time volunteering first, so they would do some phone banking. They would do some, canvassing.
Real
In
work.
the canvassing, really more tabling is what we really called it. You went out and just did different street corners to raise money for ERA ratification. So you had to do that, because we're not going to send you somewhere and you've never volunteered a day here.
Good.
So you had to do that real work.
Right.
And then we also had other folks who would host house parties to raise money for the ERA. So we had, a campaign, and we sent, dozens of volunteers to the unratified states. And then after we had it rolling for a few months and it was pretty successful, we had kind of a template on how to do the different pieces. I'm like, well, I'm from Illinois, I should go. So somebody else took over my role at the chapter, and I went home for Christmas and then stayed through the duration of the campaign in Illinois.
Excellent. Did you live at home? Did you stay in Elgin, or did you stay in Chicago? Or?
My family had actually moved
Oh.
to Wheaton
Okay.
at that point, DuPage County. And yes, we did campaigning in DuPage County, but it was
Hard.
not, yeah, it was hard. So I didn't stay there. I stayed for a little while in one of the near western suburbs. I can't remember which one, with a family, but then it just made more, and that was fine, but it made more sense for me to be working out of the office, so then I stayed with my sister in Chicago.
Okay, all right.
Volunteered in
So yes. So tell us about working out of the Chicago office. What was that experience like?
It was great. It was fantastic. It was a terrific community of women. It was always buzzing with activity. Either the folks who were there full time, either Illinois people or folks like me who came from out of state who were there full time, but others who had day jobs and were coming in after work to do that. There was a sense of purpose. A lot of it was, clerical and tedious, and looking up, like there were those reverse directories. Remember those old things you have to
sure
kind of
do.
look up? Yeah.
Right.
So a lot of it was that, and figuring out voters and how to reach them. And then a lot of it was just, get up and go. We weren't like sitting around the office all the time. We were like, going out and
Right.
Postcard campaign, or going down to Springfield to lobby. There was a lot of activity.
There were regular trips to Springfield,
Right,
as I
yeah,
recall.
regular trips.
So
Yeah.
organizing people to go there.
Yeah, exactly.
remember
Yeah,
those
and
days,
organizing
yeah.
other volunteer. So
Right.
so those of us who were working
Right.
full time were trying to get other people to agree to go,
Right.
and to do letter writing parties in their houses. It was organizing. It
Yeah.
was really exciting.
Can you talk about what skills you really developed across that campaign?
Yeah, I think both in New York and in Illinois, I definitely the volunteer recruitment and delegation of tasks to them, the political lobbying. I had not done that sort of in college, even though I was a major in political science.
Right. You were studying it, not doing it so much, huh?
Right,
Yeah.
right, yeah. So actually doing that and doing it to both sides of the aisle, was.
So you met legislators sometimes?
Right, for
and-
sure.
Right.
Did lobbying there, and bringing people in for visits with legislators, which is even more critical of a skill as an organizer.
Right.
We did a couple of marches, so participating in those. I did some press, particularly in New York when I came back. I did, some interviews on that. So I really learned, that thing,
A lot of
everything.
aspects.
Everything I need, I learned in kindergarten. I feel like all my organizing I learned, at that campaign, with the possible exception of technology tools.
Well, we didn't have many.
I do remember, though, my first visit being walked through the Chicago Now office in the old Monadnock building, and being walked by this big machine. It's like, this is a facsimile machine. We call it a fax machine, and they can send something and look, something's coming out.
Yeah.
So it was kind of fascinating to see
the beginnings.
that we had the earliest these tools that we
Right.
could use for the movement. But.
Right. So how long did you stay in Illinois, and then what happened?
So I stayed from the holidays until June, and it was I don't remember what day it was that a lot of us left on a bus to go to Washington for that big,
I was on that bus too. Yeah. Overnight.
Yeah.
I think it was June 30th was the runaway.
Was it June 30th?
I think it was.
Yeah.
I think, by that time, the last vote had occurred in Illinois, and I think that.
Yeah, Illinois was like June 22nd, actually, and I don't know when. I think we lost Florida before that, so we may have already known even before the Illinois vote.
Yeah.
But I have to say, I thought it was one of the most important rallies to have. It wasn't like, oh, okay, well, you defeated this, so we're defeated. It was like, no, we're not going away. You may have done this, but we're coming together to say you haven't heard the last of this movement.
Right. So people came from around the country, did they? Or
oh, sure.
to the rally?
Yeah, to that rally. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and having a busload of people from Illinois who had just fought for it,
right,
and going to D.C. to gather with others, it really helped us to feel not so defeated, to feel that this movement goes on, and we'll see. We'll remember in November.
Right.
So
as we said. So what? So after June 30th, then you went to the rally. And then did you return to New York?
I did.
How did and so what were your next steps?
I went back to Now New York, and I was once again hired as an organizer to work on our new Woman Power PAC.
So politics, right?
Yes, politics.
More direct political activity.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah, and it was specifically to support, candidates who would support women's rights. So that would have been 82.
Okay.
That was actually a campaign where there was a lot of turnover there, because it was the midterms after Reagan's election.
Yes.
Right?
Terrible.
So I think that's election where Jerry Nadler was elected.
Oh my goodness.
I remember working on his campaign, but I don't know if he went to Congress then or if it was some other position that he had before that, but I remember his name being on our little palm cards, right? To take to the polling place. And we didn't just help the candidates in their campaigns. We had our own thing. We printed our own palm cards, thousands of them, and we had volunteers going out as Now volunteers, as the Now PAC volunteers, to say these candidates are endorsed by, the Women Power PAC of Now New York City.
Beautiful.
And Mario Cuomo was running for governor against Ed Koch.
The original one.
Yeah, the original one, right. And we endorsed him. And he actually, afterwards, we were looking for quotes to support our PAC, and his campaign gave us a quote saying he thought that Now New York City made the difference in his campaign for governor.
Wonderful.
Like, okay.
All right.
All right. We'll take it.
So
we'll take it.
Some wins. Some wins.
So there were some wins.
Experience.
Yeah, we got some good candidates elected, and at least we felt like in New York that the women's movement could make a difference. In politics.
So a good lesson out of the whole experience.
Yeah. Right.
Or many lessons.
Or at least a good pickup from that,
Right.
It's like you have to bounce back from that.
Exactly.
And what you learn, you got to take. We didn't. We didn't get Reagan out 2 years later, so that was.
No, that was.
Did
you do any work in the '84 campaign?
I did. I actually worked in the Now New York, Now National Office.
Right.
I worked with you.
Right.
There was a whole crew of us. And many of us were assigned to different states and coordinating with the Now chapters in different states on what they were turning out. So
our ticket was
Mondale Ferraro,
right.
Of course. And I remember the day that he announced her as his running mate, and just the tears flowing in that office, the exuberation,
it was a great day.
Yeah,
great day. Yeah,
it was. I had worked actually for a woman running for Congress in New York first in the primary campaign, Betty Law. We had supported her in '82 against a Republican congressman. She narrowly lost, so she ran again in '84. But not that this ever happens, but because a woman Democrat had challenged this Republican, this kind of moderate Republican, and shown, wow, give him a run for his money. 2 years later, of course,
A man ran.
yes, yeah, and ran against her in the primary, and so she lost in the primary. Just too bad. She would have been a terrific candidate. She would have been a terrific congressperson. So then for the general, I came to work for the now office,
Okay.
and then left shortly after the election, because
Right.
there was
After
other stuff
the
to do.
84 election.
After the 84 election.
Okay, then what? Then where'd your life take you?
Then I started working on Central America work.
Okay.
Yeah, and I had started a little bit, but that became more of my focus because I had been down to Nicaragua in '83, I think, actually.
Okay.
That was part of my journey to see, like, okay, where's a country that's actually wanting to do more for women's rights instead of suppress women's rights? And
Good
that
for
was
you.
a
Yeah.
revolutionary country that actually had was encouraging and supporting its women's movement. So I had spent 4 months down there in '83, and I made other trips afterwards to help organize work brigades of Americans to.
And you're back in
that.
New York.
Yeah, so I was going from New York, down there.
To Nicaragua.
Yeah.
Right.
And then Boston too. So I was moving around a
Right.
little bit, but
Right. For various jobs, but you had sort of cast your lot with progressive social
right,
change.
exactly. And as an organizer, sort in between campaigns, I would do my secretarial, my temping, to pay the bills.
Always.
Got to have that day job. But otherwise, it was campaigns. Yeah.
And how long did the Nicaragua campaign go on?
I had a full-time job in there also with the group that was sending brigades down there, but mostly that was volunteer work. So I was doing that mostly, on
And not
my
the
own.
highest paid job you ever had either.
No.
Right.
Nor was now, for the record.
Oh,
yes, but-
right, for the record.
of
Right,
course.
absolutely, right.
But,
So,
fulfilling.
so then tell me how
Yeah.
your life changes after that.
Yeah, so I eventually, I wanted to do something, although the solidarity work was really important, and I kept doing that for years on the side. In terms of my career, like what my day job would be, I really wanted it to be not, temping and and not necessarily just one campaign after another campaign. I wanted to have some stability for that at some point. So I was thinking about what that would be that could have an impact and actually give me some stability in my life, and realized that part of the women's movement that really called to me was about the way women office workers are treated, because I had experienced that. And I also saw that being half of the world, half of the country, and not having any power is partly because it's hard to organize half of the world.
Right.
Like, where are they? They're everywhere. But that was actually made it harder, not easier, to organize.
Right.
So I realized that the answer to both of those things was union organizing for women office workers. And so I asked, of course, people I knew in now, and I remember Noreen Connell saying, 9 to 5 is
Excellent.
a group that is organizing women office workers. And it had started as an association for women office workers with Karen Nussbaum and others, and then gradually became a union, allied with Service Employees Union. So I did an informational interview with them, with Jackie Ruff, who was running 9 to 5 in Washington, happened to be in her office for my informational interview on the day she got a phone call about the Equitable Insurance Company boycott having been successfully won.
Oh, wonderful.
So, needless to say, I had to sit there and wait for a while she was managing all
Tell us
these
just
calls.
a sentence or two about what that campaign was about.
So that was, when 9 to 5 was organizing office workers, the insurance industry, the banking industry, a lot of those that, have big money and depend on women clerical workers to do all of the work, they were totally non-union, just unorganized. But 9 to 5, partly through the movie, frankly, the Jane Fonda, Lily Tomlin, Dolly Parton movie had, gained some fame for, hey, there's something out there to help and support women office workers. So some of the workers, clerical workers at Equitable Insurance Company in Syracuse, New York, had wanted to organize with 9 to 5, and they had, and then the company had refused to bargain. And So even having a union, they're like, no, we're not doing it. We're not talking. We're not
Right.
going to do this.
Right.
So there was a boycott that unions and progressive organizations across the country supported. And some of the unions were talking about, well, we have pension money and so there was
serious.
So it was a serious boycott. It wasn't just individual people saying, I'm not going to get my life insurance policy through there. It was like big corporate
excellent
funds that were at risk there. So
Right.
it was a great job that those women in 9 to 5 did in saying and it was a small office. It was not a big group
Amazing.
of women, but it was partly, this is what we mean about women taking power, is that we are going to use our solidarity across the country and our relationships and make sure that you have a right to sit at the table.
Excellent.
So, so that was
So
exciting.
that was a wonderful victory the day you were there.
Yeah,
so
that was
did you
very
get hired?
exciting.
Did you
Well, I wasn't even looking to get hired.
Oh,
I
you
was
weren't?
looking.
Okay.
It was an informational thing.
Okay.
She didn't have a job. I was just like, how would I get started? How would I go from never
Excellent.
having belonged to a union, my parents
Excellent.
not being union people,
Right.
but I've got this background. I've been doing organizing,
Right.
and I'm really interested in it, and I'd love to get involved. So, so she suggested an internship in Boston. And so I did that. I interned with them.
With SEIU.
With
9
9 to 5. Yeah,
9 to 5,
yeah.
right.
So I did that for while I was learning Spanish to go down to Nicaragua. So
Okay,
it was
all
dual
right.
purpose,
Yeah.
temping, Spanish, and an internship. And then for a year or two, we were always in communication. When there was a job opening, it's like, I'm down in Nicaragua, can't do that right now.
Right.
But I finally got a job in '85, I think,
Okay.
with them, and I ended up working 19 years for
Excellent.
SEIU. So that was,
Excellent.
and I've been in
Wonderful.
the labor movement
Yes.
pretty much ever since.
And how would you say that your women's movement activity influenced that job, and how were you able to shape SEIU as well as being shaped by the labor movement?
I think so. I mean, I think as one of the people who was with 9 to 5, who came in as 9 to 5, I think it definitely did shape SEIU. There were a lot more women leaders coming in that way and bringing in women office workers, as rank and file leaders in that way, and paying attention not as just, here's this other workforce and there happen to be some women in it, but this is a workforce primarily of women.
Right.
And since there was a lot of public sector organizing as well that was happening, not just through 9 to 5, but there were a lot of women in the public sector as well. It really helped to have that burst of energy. And I wound up doing a lot of public sector organizing. I also did healthcare organizing, which had a lot of women in it as well. So I was always drawn to the campaigns.
Right.
Even if it wasn't office workers, I was drawn to the campaigns that had a lot of women workers in them. And I think it helped to empower those workers to see women organizers, and it helped to empower me
Definitely.
to see them, willing to risk their jobs to fight.
So you're in Boston. How long did you stay in Boston?
Not that long. That was
Okay.
kind of in and out. I was pretty fluid in those days in terms of Chicago, New York, Boston, kind of wherever Nicaragua, wherever the campaign took me.
Okay.
But once I joined SEIU, I moved around a lot depending on what campaign they had for me.
Okay. So
Although I will say, I have to come back to this one. One of the campaigns I was sent to was the contract campaign for Equitable in Syracuse.
Oh, how wonderful.
Yeah.
How
so
wonderful.
when it came time to negotiate the new contract,
You got to be at the table
yeah,
to
I did.
see the fruits of the labor. Yeah.
Yeah, fruits of the labor. Unfortunately, though, this is why this campaign is not. This is a movement. It's not just a campaign. What the company announced at the bargaining table after we had done our work to bring the workers together around what are our bargaining, asks, and who's our bargaining team, and being prepared for that. The company came and said, we're closing this branch.
Amazing. Not an unusual tactic on the part of the corporations.
Correct.
So that it must have been devastating for the workers.
It was really tough, and the union leadership was willing to fight. It's like, well, if we need to boycott this again, and the workers were like, you know what, we're tired.
Really?
We don't, we just don't think we can do that again.
So there was no reversing that decision.
I mean, possibly if we had had a
Right.
nonstop spike, perhaps.
Right.
Instead, we negotiated a generous severance package
Okay.
and job training and other things, placement, and
Right.
so we, so having a union, they were able to have a better
Had something better.
situation.
Yeah.
But, you know, sometimes when women stand up and ask for their rights, they get slapped down. And if they can't get slapped down right then, you know, sometimes it's the day after. So that was not a great lesson to learn, but it was a true lesson to learn. Yeah.
So how did SEIU take that? They didn't have a negative impression of that.
No, I mean they supported, and that's one thing about it being run by women, is that they supported what the women wanted to do around that.
You must have been disappointed.
Yeah,
very much.
It was tough.
So then what happens next?
Well, I kept organizing and moved a little bit out of some of the 9-to-5 specific organizing to do healthcare. I organized the first union hospital in the state of Nevada.
Excellent.
So
you got
Las
around
Vegas.
The country too.
Yeah, I did.
Yeah.
I did, and was in on the ground floor for home care workers in Los Angeles, which was one of the breakthroughs for that sector. Also, mostly women.
Yes. Still an important sector. It's still fighting for
very important
decent wages and working conditions. Yeah, it's good.
Yeah.
Good.
So, yeah, and then I've worked for a couple of other unions since, but that's been a lot of it. And I took a little bit of break during the time I was having kids. I have a lot of accomplishments I was part of and contributed to, so I will own my contribution. I do feel like being part of the political campaign right after the ERA was important in New York in particular. I really think that we took some of that momentum of women being disgusted by, Ronald Reagan's stance on women's issues, and helped to parlay that into more victories at the ballot box, and other campaigns after that. But that one in particular stands out as something I was part of and proud of. And I think in terms of the organizing women workers, public sector workers that I've organized, and certainly getting hospital organizing going in the state of Nevada, which I think is part of the reason that it's a little bit more blue than it used to be, is that having strong unions there, as well as organizing home care workers who have been a workforce that really deserves it and needs it.
Definitely.
So I'm proud of those accomplishments, and although other than public sector workers, it wasn't so much office workers, which was my personal entry into it. It's still the same way of like, oh yeah, that's the work that you do. That's not as important somehow. And until women really are organized around their workplace rights. I mean, it's all of it, right? It's like our rights in the home, our rights in the workplace, our rights, politically. All of those are important spheres, but but having that power, that unity that comes with a union and being organized as working women is really important to me. So I'm glad to have contributed in that.
So we're currently planning an ERA reunion for the workers and the people who worked in Illinois. So talk about that, if you would, just a little bit. Wonderful. Yeah, well, I've been looking forward to that for a long time, because it was kind of a seminal moment in my life. And it's hard to think of a defeat as a seminal moment in a movement, but I do think it's at least it's a moment in the movement that did take a lot of women up in terms of hope and activism and unity, and it's a no-brainer, and this should not be controversial, and slam them into the wall of their actual lack of equality in this country. Reality. Yeah, the reality of it. Yeah. And in a way that did not devastate most of us, that I think for most of us was that wake-up call, and like, oh my gosh, we got to get busy. So, so for me, both kind of looking at it in that way, and just personally knowing, for me, it was like, gave me all these skills and really launched my career as an organizer. It was important at this moment to kind of come together, and the ERA just passed, finally was ratified in Illinois last year. Pretty exciting. Yes. A little late, but so we'll see how it all goes. Yes. So I really wanted to be able to come together with people like you, Mary Jane, and others that the work you put into this. It'll be wonderful to see people. So it's an opportunity, and hopefully we'll be getting some of their stories. What are you working on in addition to the ERA reunion as an activist in your later life or
Yeah.
in your current life?
I mean, really, mostly as an organizer right now in my day job, because
Okay.
my day job is,
Consuming. Right.
is pretty draining. So I
yeah.
haven't given as much time outside of that. In my younger days as a union organizer, I did work in the solidarity movement on the side, and then occasionally would do homelessness organizing.
Right.
Now it's pretty much do my union job and go to rallies, the
Right.
Women's March or the
Take care of
others.
your kids, right?
Yeah.
How old are your
come up.
kids?
My kids are all grown,
Are
but
they?
a couple
Okay.
of them are still at home. So
Okay. Yeah.
it's the
To
young
keep you
adult,
busy. Right.
support still.
So is there anything else you'd like to talk about that we haven't covered yet?
Well, just a couple of memories, if folks haven't shared them from the Illinois
Okay.
campaign.
No, that's
But
good.
talking about like how the Illinois ERA defeat, or the defeat of the ERA in general, did not sort of like stop us in our tracks. I really do think part of that was about how it was handled. I mentioned the bus ride earlier, like
Yeah.
having that rally.
Yes.
But I will never forget your feisty speech,
Thank you.
in the rotunda in Springfield. It wasn't like oh my gosh, it wasn't dejected. It was, it was onward,
Right.
and on the floor of the General Assembly in Illinois, Monica Faith Stewart, literally the best speech I've ever heard in my life. And so women being able to take defeat and interpret it for younger women,
Right.
Interpret it as like, this is not surprising that you from this position of power would do this, but we are not going to let you get away with it. We are going to keep organizing and fighting, and we demand our
Right.
equality, and we will one day win it. That
Right.
is, that inspiration was really important to me, and I think it's important for all of us, maybe more now in the Trump era than ever, because it's easy to feel defeated when something goes so wrong. But we can't afford to. We have to pick ourselves up and say that ultimately justice is going to triumph, and ultimately we'll have equality, but only if we join together and fight for it.
Right.
And it's the real warriors of the women's movement who came before me that that I owe a real debt of gratitude to. So that's why I'm here. So
Wonderful.
thanks, Mary Jean.
Thank you very much.